What's up, guys? Mulligan here, and today I'm bringing you a deck tech and an in-depth gameplay guide on Mech Priest. This is my first deck tech, so I'm not gonna have webcam on for this one. But if I do any more deck techs or guides in the future, I will definitely look to get that implemented. I wanted to give a little bit of backstory on how I came to playing Mech Priest in this metagame. For the past few seasons, I've been playing pretty much standard decks: Druid, Oil Rogue, Control Warrior, some Freeze Mage here and there, a little bit of mid-range Paladin, not so much Secret Paladin, but I found that no matter where I was on the ladder while climbing, everybody pretty much knows what to do against the said standard decks. And the reason why is because the metagame has pretty much been figured out. The introduction of standard has been introduced, but there's a lull in Hearthstone right now. We're pretty much just waiting for standard to hit and for Whispers of the Old Gods to come out, and both were announced a while back, so we've just been waiting and waiting for at least the past month, almost 2 months, and the metagame has stayed the same since late last year. So eventually last season I just got bored and I just decided to revisit Mech Priest. I just pretty much stopped caring, and I just wanted to at least have fun with the deck that I was playing, but at the same time I wanted the deck to be good. So the last time I played this deck was shortly after the Grand Tournament was released. I was trying to get the Valkyrie Sisters to work with spare part synergy. So along with Edith's Darkbane and Shola Lightbane, I was playing things like Clockwork Gnome, Tinkertown Technician, and I even tried out Gazlo at one point in time. But it didn't work out too well, and eventually I put the deck down. I found out that one of the biggest problems Mech Priest has is that, just like other mech decks and just like other tempo decks in general in Hearthstone, it tends to run out of gas. You're playing all these early game threats and you're trying to get a tempo advantage and use that to snowball into a win and eventually if your board gets contested early, if your opponent has answers or they're playing minions along with you and they manage to wrestle the board from you, then you find yourself in a position where you're top decking. You're hoping that you're going to find another answer to put down to try to get back into the game, and more often than not, you don't end up finding it. So the other main reason not to run Mech Priest is because Dragon Priest exists. It's a very good mid-range deck, and when Dragon Priest curves out, it's very, very difficult to beat. It can pretty much beat any deck if it hits its curve and doesn't miss a drop, which I'll actually get into in a little bit. But the question I was asking myself when building this deck again was, how can I give myself a chance to win if the game goes late and I run out of threats to play, since that happens so often before. And the answer to that is Elise Starseeker. And Elise just like these control decks that you see, Control Priest, Control Warrior, Elise Starseeker is their main win condition. They just run a bunch of removal or area of effect spells, and they stall the game out until they draw Elise, and then put the map to the Golden Monkey in your deck. You draw the map, you play that, and you actually put Golden Monkey into your deck, and then Golden Monkey turns all your cards into legendaries. And that's your win condition. So I figure, well, why can't Mech Priest do the same thing? You know? And it's worked out very, very well. I've been able to hang against other control decks. No matter how much removal they have, I'm able to just stick around between Elise and other cards, which I'll get into later. But and mainly the Discover cards, Gorilla Bot 3 and Priest's Own Museum Curator. Between Elise and that, I find myself able to continuously put out a steady stream of threats for my opponent to deal with. But yeah, Elise is this deck's late game win condition, and it prevents me from running out of gas. Discover also gives the deck sustainability, especially when combined with Bran Bronzebeard, which I also wanted to mention. I put Bran in to combo with Elise Starseeker, so that way I would have double the chance of getting my Golden Monkey off before my opponent would in a control matchup, or just in general, just for more consistency. And Bran has pretty good synergy in this deck, similar to Zoo, with other cards like Museum Curator and Gorilla Bot A3. One thing I wanted to mention regarding Dragon Priest, I did mention that when it hits its curve, it's very hard. It's pretty hard for the deck to lose. It can beat pretty much any deck. The key thing being when it hits its curve. The main advantage of Mech Priest over Dragon Priest is that Mech Priest has a lower, at least this Mech Priest has a lower curve than most standard Dragon Priests. And Dragon Priest is just more prone to missing their drops and not curving out. A lot of times your hands when you're playing Dragon Priest, they can occasionally get pretty clunky. I mean, you don't have a dragon in your hand, or you don't have something else in hand to, you know, have an ability go off. Sometimes you're even forced to keep a high cost dragon in your hand just so, you know, your Twilight Whelps can get their buffs they need, or Blackwing Technicians or Twilight Guardians, things like that. So that's the thing that Mech Priest has going for it in the whole Mech Priest versus Dragon Priest debate. Mech Priest is just, we have a lower curve and we're just a little bit faster. We're able to flood the board a little bit better than Dragon Priest can. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into the deck. We'll just go through the cards one by one. First card is Power Word Shield. Court card in any Priest deck, and this deck is no exception. As far as mulligans go, you want to keep this card along with a 1-drop. Sometimes you will also want to keep it with a few 2-drops if you are on the coin. But great card. Buffs the health of all minions, which is excellent. That's what we want in Priest. And it cycles. Northshire Cleric. Priest staple 1-drop, and it's no exception in this deck either. The only time that you don't drop this turn 1 is versus Warrior, as they can get value off of Fiery War Axe, unless you can Power Word Shield it on the same turn. So that'll be a situation where you're going second against a Warrior, usually. Or on turn 2 if you're going first. But in the mid to late game, it's usually best to wait until you can immediately draw off of it. It's great that Northshire Cleric is not a dead card in the late game. It's one reason why it's core in Priest. And it combos very well with Holy Nova. One Zombie Chow. So Zombie Chow, just to give some more backstory, I used to play 2 Cogmasters in this deck. And when picking, after a while, I decided to give Zombie Chow a try. And I guess there's kind of this golden rule in Hearthstone regarding Zombie Chow of only playing 1 copy. And the reason you only play 1 copy is to prevent dead draws in the late game. This card is arguably even more of a dead draw than Cogmaster in the late game. But playing only 1 Zombie Chow did allow me to, it freed up a deck slot for me. And that extra slot became Defender of Argus, which I will explain in a little bit why I'm playing Defender of Argus. But Uh, Zombie Chow performs about as well as Cogmaster does at its job, and its job is to contest early minions. But I wanted to kind of go over uh, what decks Zombie Chow is better against and what decks Cogmaster is better against. And this is assuming you have a 2-drop mech in your hand as well to play after Cogmaster. So Annoytron, Mech Warper, and Shadow Boxer. But Zombie Chow is better against Hunter, mid-range Paladin, any aggro Paladins you might run into, Dragon Priest, Zoo, and Reno Lock. Cogmaster is better against mid-range Druid, Mage, Secret Paladin, Murloc Paladin, Control Priest, Aggro Shaman, and Warrior. And both of them are about even against pretty much any rogue. As Cogmaster trades with Oil Rogue's 3-drops, and Chow's a bit harder to kill because it has more health. But yeah, Zombie Chow's in here to make the matchup against Hunter a little bit better without sacrificing too much against the other matchups. Because as mid-range Druid, we already have a good matchup. Tempo Mage is also pretty good. We're also favored against Secret Paladin. And the deck's also good against Warrior. Control Warrior, anyway. So, Chow helps us against some of our worst matchups like Hunters, Dragon Priest, and Reno Lock, in a sense. So, Shadow Word Pain. This is the first flex slot in this deck, but I want to give a couple reasons that I chose to play Shadow Word Pain. It's great against minions that Mech Priest struggles against. Doomsayer is played in 2 of the decks we are not favored against, Murloc Paladin and Freeze Mage. Deathlord is another minion that Mech Priest struggles to kill, and Deathlord is very common in Control Priest. It can also be seen in decks like Control Warrior. But it's also good against cards like Imp Gang Boss, Sludge Belcher, Twilight Guardian, Flame Waker, Tunnel Trog, Totem Golem, Violet Teacher, Acolyte of Pain, Grim Patron, Shielded Minibot, and even Knife Juggler. Shadow Word Pain, you're always going to find a good target with it versus pretty much every deck in this metagame right now. It's the weakest against Druid because the only target you really have is Keeper of the Grove. And Sludge Belcher. Sludge Belcher, if they're running Sludge Belcher, Shadow Word Pain is, of course, great against that. But Druid is where this card is the weakest. But those are the reasons I'm playing Shadow Word Pain. Annoytron, this is the second flex slot. Annoytron does not fight for the board that well, but it's good at protecting your more valuable minions that aren't that resilient, such as Mech Warper, Shadow Boxer, and Northshire Cleric. It's a mech, and it's excellent against Control Warrior, and more importantly, it's excellent against Hunter because this deck lacks healing. And like I was saying before, this deck tends to struggle against Hunter, especially aggro Hunter and hybrid Hunter. But next card that we're gonna look at is Mech Warper. Mech Warper is just standard in any deck. In any mech deck, it's just a core card. The mana acceleration it offers can be downright broken at times, allowing you to flood the board with mechs you normally wouldn't be able to play. Not much else to say about Mech Warper. You play it. If you're building a mech deck, you have to play it. Museum Curator. Museum Curator is, I'd say it's pretty standard in every priest deck now, and this deck's no exception. This is just an amazing card. In this deck, it just helps you smooth out your curve against other decks. Most of the time, you're going to end up finding a Dark Cultist. Even though you will find it a lot of the time, you won't find Dark Cultist all the time, which is why I still play Dark Cultist, and I think Dark Cultist is just the best 3-drop to play in general. Just like Annoytron, it doesn't fight for the board that well. In fact, it's a little bit worse, but you're not really playing Curator to fight for the board. You're playing Curator to just have some type of board presence, and the main reason is the battle cry to get a death rattle card. Getting things like Sylvanas Windrunner, Cairn Bloodhoof is just absolutely amazing. I mean, you can even get Piloted Sky Golem, and that fulfills the duty of having a mech and something with death rattle. Getting more Piloted Shredders off of this card is great. And again, Dark Cultist isn't that bad either. Finding taunts against the matchups where you need taunts to survive. Getting things like Sludge Belcher, even Death Lord is great. So Shadowboxer. Shadowboxer, it's a core card in any Mech Priest. It's similar to Northshire Cleric. It combos ridiculously well with Holy Nova. I would argue it combos with Holy Nova even better than Northshire Cleric does. But I have no problem playing both copies if my whole board is hurt and using Holy Nova to get a ton of ping damage in matchups against minion-based decks where I need to get board control and wrestle the board away from my opponent. But Shadowboxer is one of the reasons you choose Priest as your class to build a mech deck with. Shadow Word Death. You need some type of cheap single target removal that deals with big threats. This card is a huge tempo swing, often killing minions for twice its cost or more. Since it's only 3 mana, it allows you to develop your board at the same time, and we have enough low cost minions to where that's a pretty common scenario in this deck. It's another core card in my opinion because Entomb is not cheap. Velen's Chosen. So people are going to wonder, I'm sure, why I'm not playing 2 copies of this card. As much of a blowout as Velen's Chosen can be, playing it on one of your 2-drops on turn 3, I don't want to play multiple copies of cards that can end up being dead in your hand. There's also no guarantee you will have a minion 2 buff on turn 3, because our minions are tough, but they're not that tough. That said, I think 1 is definitely core, but not 2. But it's a great card in any Priest deck since it allows minions to trade up and survive, and Velen's Chosen is the only way to buff Holy Nova in this deck. So Bran Bronzebeard. I started using Bran at first, like I said earlier, to combo it with Elise. But after playing with him and realizing how much synergy he has with the other cards in the deck, I'm sold on him being a core card. Getting Discovered to go off twice is huge in certain matchups, such as Control Warrior. Mech Priest still has a tendency to run out of gas, just like it did in previous iterations. But Bran patches up that weakness very well, along with Elise, giving you the ability to go into the late game against any deck without running out of threats. Also combos well with Defender of Argus, Lotheb, and Dr. Boom. Dark Cultist, core card in any Priest deck, I would say. The stat line and Death Rattle are still ridiculous, even in this metagame. And it works even better in a more minion-based Priest deck like this one. You often don't care if he dies, as long as he got value beforehand. Keeping it alive isn't wrong though, as this deck does value something that can do 3 damage early on. As you'll notice that this is the only early game minion we have that has 3 power. Everything else has either 1 or 2 power to go along with it, so pretty valuable in some matchups. So Defender of Argus. Defender of Argus is flex slot number 3. Like I was saying earlier, I cut the Cogmasters I was running to fit this guy in, and I've never looked back. Argus has been an absolute all-star, especially since it can buff the attack of my minions, which is a rare commodity in Priest. The real reason I put Argus in is to help against Hunter, which this deck struggles against, but it also happens to be good against decks that rely on bursts with minions such as Murloc Paladin and Druid, so you don't get cheesed as much out of games that you should have won. And once again, it's another card that combos great with Bran. So Elise Starseeker. Your late game win condition if your opponent manages to stabilize in the mid game. Between her, Bran, and your Discover cards, you can confidently go into Fatigue against the most common control decks like Priest and Warrior and still be able to pump out threats the whole way through. The fact that you can double your chances of going off with Golden Monkey if you combo her with Bran arguably makes your late game win condition better than theirs, since you have a decent draw engine in Northshire Cleric. Another big reason why Mech Priest no longer struggles with running out of gas. So GorillaBot A3, this is the 4th flex slot. GorillaBot has performed well overall, and you get value from the battle cry for the most part. I'm still not quite ready to call this a core card, but it's close. Getting guys like Sneeze Old Shredder or Foe Reaper 4000 can be huge, but even mid-range mechs like Clockwork Knight and Mechanical Yeti are fine too. Of course, double value is always nice with Bran. And all that being said, I don't think this card is impactful enough to play 2 copies of, especially because I run Piloted Shredder. So Piloted Shredder is really not much to say about this card. It's the best 4-drop in the game. Dragon Priest has Twilight Guardian, and we have this. It's core in any mech deck, and almost every other deck in general, in my opinion. It helps you fight for a board to the point where opponents sometimes just straight up ignore it because it takes too much to remove. There's really not much else to say. You just definitely play Piloted Shredder. And this mech deck is absolutely no exception. Okay, so Holy Nova, I feel that Holy Nova, only 1 copy of this card is core in more tempo-based or mid-range priest decks like this one, as well as Dragon Priest. It's not a powerful area of effect on its own, but where it truly shines is if you and your opponent are about even on board, and you can bring their entire board to 2 health and then Holy Nova, healing your guys and clearing theirs at the same time is a huge swing. And Holy Nova, it only gets better in situations where you have Shadow Boxer in play or Northshire Cleric, or even both. Which actually, when you play this deck, you'll find that that's actually fairly common. I feel that 2 copies, though, is far too clunky, even though some Mech Priest lists in the past have run 2 copies. Alright, so Lotheb. Lotheb is the 5th and last flex slot, and I want to say this is barely a flex slot. The reason why I say this is because Lotheb helps out so much in several matchups where we are not favored, particularly Oil Rogue, Freeze Mage, and Murloc Paladin. Lotheb is also very good against Warrior and Druid. He also helps set up 2-turn lethals if you manage to get board control, which you need, especially against the aforementioned decks, and often nearly guarantees that your board will come back to you the next turn. I have no intention of cutting Lotheb anytime soon. It's just an extremely useful minion. 1 upgraded repair bot. One of the main reasons you choose to play Mech Priest over other mech decks. It's effectively a 5/9 in stats if you have a mech on board, and you'll have one on board more often than not. All the mechs in this deck are good targets, with Annoytron being, I would say, the worst one. But you can use the buff mech as a source of damage to kill off opposing minions and just keep it healthy with your hero power. I want to say don't be afraid of playing this guy without getting the Battlecry value, especially if you're trying to do something like proc Discover off of GorillaBot to get another mech. A 5/5 for 5 mana is still very, very good. Alright, so next I want to talk about Entomb. Entomb, honestly, I feel the card has been core in every Control Priest deck since League of Explorers. And 1 copy finds its way into Mech Priest. I feel this card is one of the 2 necessary evils that you have to play in Mech Priest. And I say that because they're threats that decks play that your minions just aren't going to be able to stand up to on their own. Worse yet, there are times where you will lose board control, and this card is an insurance policy for when opposing decks play one of their main big threats. Be sure to watch the games, guys, because I talk about what targets you need to use Entomb on in certain matchups, but I will give a few examples here. Some include only using Entomb on Ysera if you're going up against Control Warrior or Dragon Priest, and only using it on things like Old Murkai, Murloc Warleader, and Sludge Belcher in that specific order when you're going up against Murloc Paladin. It's an amazing card, but it needs to be used correctly in order to make it to the late game against some decks. But you will often find, because of this, that this will actually be one of the 2 cards in this deck that you'll be holding in your hand a lot, which is another reason why I only play 1 copy. Following up on that, 1 Light Bomb. It's another card that has been core in every Control Priest ever since the card was released back in Goblins vs. Gnomes. Gets a slot here in Mech Priest. Due to the high health minions that this deck runs, the symmetrical effect often isn't really that negative on our side of the board. The health buffs in this deck also keep our minions from dying when we use Light Bomb. But anyway, this is the second necessary evil I feel you have to run in Mech Priest. Otherwise, there are common board states in this meta that you will end up losing to. You'll find that Dr. Boom is the main target, the main situation where you'll end up using Light Bomb. But it can take care of other situations too, like if you've lost the board against another aggressive deck like Zoo or Secret Paladin, and they manage to extend and flood the entire board and empty almost their entire hand. You can Light Bomb and just wipe them completely, and you will force them into top deck mode along with you. But just like Entomb, it's another card you're often going to have sitting in your hand until you can use it as an insurance policy. But Light Bomb, it not only forces aggressive decks in the top deck mode, it can force a lot of decks in the top deck mode. Like even against Control, it doesn't force them into top deck mode per se, but Control decks tend to run fewer minions. So you may be able to Light Bomb one of their main big threats, and they'll have nothing but answers in their hand that they can't really use until you start trying to take board control. So, but Light Bomb gives you a chance to get back in the game more often than not. And the last card we want to talk about, actually we've got 2 more here. Cabal Shadow Priest. I would say this is probably the best 6-drop you can play in Mech Priest. In the current metagame, there are very few matchups where Cabal Shadow Priest won't find a target to steal. In fact, the only matchups where there are little to no good targets to take with Cabal are Druid and Oil Rogue specifically. Even taking something like a Keeper of the Grove or a 1/2 Slime from Sludge Belcher, or even a 1/1 Living Roots token or Boombot is okay against Druid, as that means they have less damage to work with their Savage Roars. The stats are a bit underwhelming for a 6-drop, but when you're getting value almost all the time against almost every deck, 4/5 along with whatever you steal is often good enough. That said, I feel 2 copies would be too clunky for this deck, just because of the 6 mana cost. Much less for any other 6-drop I might play, like Paladin Sky Golem. And the last, but definitely not least, card in this deck is Dr. Boom. Just like Paladin Shredder, this card needs very little explanation. It's the best 7-drop in the game right now until the format split happens. Playing your Dr. Boom before your opponent can play theirs on curve is big. Playing it on an empty board, or just playing it uncontested in general, where the opponent's board can't deal with it, is also big. And just the fact that the Boombots are also mechs They can help proc Gorilla Bots Discover. That's amazing. You can even combo him with Brand Bronzebeard on turn 10, although that honestly should not be your goal. You shouldn't be trying to be greedy and waiting until turn 10 to do that combo. It's often better to just play Boom without it. But a couple things I want to go over. A couple of tips when playing this deck. It's important to, and I'll mention this during the games too, you want to diversify your damage. Meaning that if you have a 1-power minion already out, and you have the choice between putting something like a Curator out or a 2-power mech, you should more often than not choose the 2-power mech. It's especially true if you have a turn 3 play already, or you're up against another aggressive or tempo-based deck. I mean, there's exceptions. It's not as big a deal against control decks like Control Priest or Control Warrior. It's still nice to do, but if you don't have a diverse amount of minions that can do different amounts of damage, like if you have a bunch of guys that only do 1 damage, then it's not that big of a deal. And the reason I say that is because we're not Zoo. Priest doesn't have a lot of ways to buff attack values, so that's the main reason why we really have to diversify our damage when playing things on board and thinking about what minion we're going to play next. Zoo's more forgiving in this aspect, so you can just get away with playing whatever drops you have, but in this deck you can't really do that. You'll also have to take risks on occasion when playing this deck sometimes, again because we lack ways to buff attack and there's no burst in this particular version of Mech Priest. You'll find that there are times where you'll have to overextend a bit more than you might be comfortable doing because of the lack of burst. You want to, if there's a chance where you can win the game if you play 1 extra minion, but that means you overextend a little bit and you won't have much left in your hand. If the board gets wiped, you still want to take that risk. Also, cards like Gorilla Bot and like I was saying earlier, Upgraded Repair Bot, don't be afraid to play those cards for no value from the battle cry, if that means that you get the board. And sometimes sacrificing Dark Cultist is correct just to get the buff on another minion, like something with a Death Rattle. There's been games where I've sacrificed Dark Cultist to put the buff on a Pile to Shredder to make it even harder to deal with. And silence is being played, but not really that much. So more often than not, you don't really get punished for doing a play like that. And I would do that even if Dark Cultist doesn't trade evenly with the other minions. So that's pretty much it for the deck itself. As far as the matchups go, I will go over those in the gameplay videos. So feel free to watch the games and you'll be able to find out the mulligans for against each deck. Now, there are 3 decks that I do not have gameplay videos for, so I will talk about those. The 3 decks are Aggro, well, 4 decks actually. Aggro Hunter, Hybrid Hunter, Dragon Priest, and Oil Rogue. So against Aggro and Hybrid Hunter, I do talk about this in the Hunter gameplay that I do have, which is actually against a mid-range Hunter. But you generally just want to keep 1 and 2 drops only. You do not keep anything that costs 3 or more at all. And then sometimes you might even want to toss Power Word Shield, even though I know earlier I said you could keep it if you have another 1 drop in hand. But sometimes you might even want to toss that if your early game isn't solid enough in your opening hand. And it's all about staying alive in those matchups, which I'll talk about in the gameplay vid that I have for Hunter. Dragon Priest is the mulligan is actually the same. You mulligan the same way as you would against Control Priest. You want your early game guys, but the big thing is you would really like to go first against Dragon Priest, because in my experience I found that Dragon Priest, if you're not going first, you're just playing from behind the whole game, and you're just hoping that they miss a drop, so that way you can catch up on board. Because if they don't, and they went first and you went second, then it's kind of a no-win situation. It's extremely hard for this deck to beat a Dragon Priest that's plays on curve throughout almost the entire game, especially if we're going second. Outside of that, though, the mulligan is, I keep it the same. I just keep my early drops, and if I'm on coin, I'll keep Paladin Shredder or Elise Starseeker. I won't keep Elise, though, if I know it's a Dragon Priest. But and then Oil Rogue, you want to keep your early guys, like, but especially Northshire Cleric, Zombie Chow, Annoyatron, any of your other 2-drop mechs, Shadow Boxer, Mech Warper. I tend to only keep Lotheb or Dr. Boom if I'm on the coin. Museum Curator is also okay. You're still getting the battle cry off of it, but it's pretty easy for Rogue to deal with. And then Shadow Word Pain, you can keep, but there's really only one target for Shadow Word Pain, and that's Violet Teacher in that matchup. And then I'll also keep Paladin Shredder on coin. So those are the mulligans and strategies for those matchups. The other matchups I will definitely explain in the gameplay that's coming up. And let's go ahead and get into the games. One other thing I wanted to mention is that all of them are pre-recorded with post commentary, but there will be a bonus game at the end where I left a live commentary in. So hopefully you guys will be okay with that. But if you guys like the deck tech and the gameplay, feel free to just leave a thumbs up. It definitely helps me out and helps my channel out, and lets me know if you guys like this type of thing and you want to see more of it in the future. But and I'll have links to all my social media and places where I hang out at online in the description box below. But yeah, once again, this is Mulligan with the Mech Priest deck tech, and I will check you guys out next time. You guys take care. Enjoy the games.